Okie dokie. So Ragita and I are the co-chairs, the GPSC Research Council. The co-chair system exists because we found that having one STEM person and one humanities person worked best. It was kind of an accidental discovery, but it's difficult for us to reach across that kind of boundary on our own and kind of understand the other side. So our purpose here is to understand both STEM and humanities, their needs. We've made, since last semester even, we've made some changes to the rubric. We'll talk about that as we go. But what we want to do here really is just kind of talk about the grant itself, maybe give you a little bit of background on it, talk about kind of some of the changes, how you apply for this, and then just let previous recipients and some of the council members that are here just talk about, what they're looking for, how they approached it, that kind of thing. It's just kind of an informal Q&A, and we're just going to kind of let it go however it goes. There's no real structure here. So Ragita, if you want to get the ball rolling with the PowerPoint, we'll.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Let me. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today, panelists, and also those of you who are interested in the research grant. We'll kind of talk a little bit first about what the research grant is, who we are as Research Council, and also GPSC, and then we'll discuss about the application and review processes, and we'll kind of finish off with the informal Q&A with the previous grant awardees and any members of the Research Council. And hopefully we can answer all of your questions today. Just a brief introduction of who we are. My name is Ragita Pramudya. I'm a PhD candidate in food science. Specifically, my research focuses on sensory science and consumer behavior. Even more specifically, my dissertation focuses on associations between two senses. So essentially how humans could subconsciously connect two different stimuli from two different sensory modalities with each other, and also look at environmental effects on consumption experiences. And then I'll just let Will kind of talk about himself and his research.
Yeah, so I'm Will. You'll notice, so Ragita built the PowerPoint. You'll notice that she got a very professional photo. I have a photo of myself with my cat on my cat's birthday. Ragita chose that, I did not. So that's Twix having her birthday last year. So I'm a PhD candidate in the history department. I started here in 2016. So my very broad focus is the Cold War, more specifically the Cold War as it related to the US-Iranian relationship. And then dissertation research is actually the social history of the Iranian hostage crisis from the perspective of Iranian students. When historians look at this, if they look at the social history whatsoever, it's always about the families of the hostages and the hostages themselves, which of course is noteworthy, but it's very one-sided. So I am trying to build the second side to that story through their own publications, their own words, op-eds, and so on, which there are tons of. They were the Iranian students in the U.S. were fairly prolific writers. So that's basically what I do. And as you can see, we have a humanities STEM balance here, again, to kind of reiterate that. And I think in a way, we kind of complete each other when it comes to trying to figure out how to make this grant work. So I think that's pretty much all I have on that one. If we want to move on.
Yeah, and then I also kind of wanted to introduce to those of you who don't already know who the GPSC and the Research Council are. So the GPSC is a student-led body that helps to advocate for graduate and professional students. We meet once a month, and we basically just kind of discuss ongoing issues as to what's going on campus and how we can resolve those issues, and also to just overall improve the lives of the graduate students at the U of A. And specifically, the Research Council focuses on anything research related. So, if you run into any issues regarding research, any concerns, inquiries, just let us know. You can reach us anytime at those emails listed here. We're here to serve you, so please let us know how we can help. Do you have anything else to add, Will?
Yeah, so just on the topic of what Research Council does, we also do an annual spring colloquium as well, which we will do a newswire about fairly soon. That gives you a chance to kind of practice delivering your research to a diverse body, people that aren't in your field. Kind of helps you figure out how to whittle it down into something that's comprehensible to everybody, as opposed to just being jargon heavy and area specific. Kind of like the 3-minute thesis, only with 2 extra minutes, basically. But we do that as well, just as a way to kind of get people comfortable to advocate, for you, mostly to advocate for your CV, which is the most important part. And it's a chance to deliver your research in a room full of people, where ideally you won't have that guy in the room that wants to ask a question in the form of a rant, which you often get at conferences. So we will do a newswire on that, but that is our other primary function, is the research colloquium.
So basically the spotlight of this event, the research grant. So the research grants are biannually awarded, which means that we award them at the end of every spring and fall semester. We award approximately $1,500 per person. And these are open to all fields and graduate phases. So whether you're just starting out your PhD or master's, or you're nearing the end of your graduate career, we encourage you to apply for these grants. We're also the only source of funding open to all fields at the U of A. So that's kind of a neat thing, unique thing that we have. And you can apply for these research grants at the beginning of spring and fall semesters via HogsLink. We'll typically send out a newswire notification, and we have the links on there as well. Or you can go to the GPSC research website, where all of this information is also on there, and there's a link to it as well. Thank you, Laura, for posting the website.
As a quick update, that website will be updated again today. It's a little off at the moment, but it'll be fixed today. Just to add to that, we do have, through GPSC, there are 2 other kinds of grants offered that we don't control. Those are controlled by the finance committee and then the assembly at large. But there's a travel grant, which basically, if you get accepted into a conference, GPSC will pay up to $500 for you to do that conference, to go. Right now, because so much of those are virtual, there's of course no traveling fee, but conferences are still charging enrollment fees. So right now, the travel grant is kind of an enrollment grant, really. So if you get accepted into a conference and it's $85 to enroll, GPSC will pay for that if you apply for the travel grant. And then also something called the PIGS grant, which is a clever acronym given the setting, professional something grant. It is for internships, workshops, that kind of thing. This was mainly aimed at law students initially, because they're kind of on the periphery of the research grant, but it is open to everybody. And those are $500 as well, I think. But we wanted to include those here so that you know that there are actually other funding opportunities through GPSC as well, although we don't control those 2 specific grants.
So with regards to the review process, the Research Council reviews all the applications. So we have 12 members in total, including me and Will right now. And it is a double-blind review, which means that when we review them, we don't know who we're reviewing. We don't know the names. And we kind of go through multiple rounds of reviews, and then we meet up and discuss what we all think about all the applications. and they're scored on a 120-point rubric. If we can, if we somehow can't come to like an agreement as to, you know, which application should move forward, we can also ask a third party to review, just to make sure that we really get all perspectives and reviews for all the applications. Originally, when we started the research grant, we only had one rubric, which was the STEM-based, what we now call the STEM-based rubric. But Will and a member of the Research Council had just recently developed the humanities-based, and he can talk more about it later. But shown here is kind of the summary of what the rubric for the STEM-based rubrics are looking for. And I think that we kind of noticed from looking at the previous applications is just make sure that when you're writing these grants, remember that we're also kind of looking at your professionalism. So make sure that this kind of like, you know, an application that you could also submit to like a larger organization or something, even though this is kind of a smaller grant with, you know, if you compare it to like all the other bigger grants. Do you have anything to add, Will?
Yeah, kind of on the topic of the rubric. The very first rubric was written by the first Research Council chair, and she's in STEM, and it was very STEM heavy. Not intentionally, that's just how she wrote it. Very STEM heavy. And the first grant that we did, we got a few people from humanities sending in feedback saying this was obviously very STEM heavy. It was difficult for us to navigate this. So for the second grant, we did some serious editing to try to make it more accessible to humanities. I'm in the humanities. That's, you know, it's near and dear to my heart. And what we found is that instead of having people from outside complaining the second time, internally we were complaining that it was clearly difficult for humanities people to still write for this grant. So what's on the screen right now is the grant, is the instructions for STEM applicants. On the next slide, if you would go to the next slide, please. This is our inaugural attempt at a humanities rubric. So if you're applying and you're in humanities, you will use this as opposed to the other one. This is an attempt to make it, far easier to navigate as a humanities researcher, as well as something that just kind of fits more so in the theme of humanities itself. This is based off various grants coming out of National Endowment for the Arts, as well as some federal level archives that offer small grants. It's kind of an amalgamation of those. This is our first shot, so I'm sure there'll be edits made after this next round. But we wanted to make it as accessible as possible. We didn't want anybody to feel like they were being left out based on their field. So we'll see how this goes. But on the application form itself, both of these are on there. So when you go to apply, if you're STEM, you'll do one, or if you're humanities, you will do the other. That's all I got. So that kind of takes us to, you know, the question and answer part. And what we want to do here is really, if anybody has questions about, you know, how to fulfill the requirements, how to apply, this would be, you know, where you ask those questions. Our previous recipients that we stole photos of from the internet, our previous recipients, you know, are here to talk about their experiences or give advice. There are also some people from the Research Council here to do the same thing. So with that, it's pretty much anybody's game. Or if any of our previous recipients had things that they just wanted to say right out of the gate, that works too.
I can start, Will. I could say something if anybody wants to hear from it.
Sure.
So just kind of a little orientation around my view of grants. I'm in the Walton College of Business, and there's kind of this mixed view of whether or not you should apply for it, if internal funding is available, should you apply for it, what's the value? And I come from a background where I worked for the University of Virginia in the School of Medicine, and it was extremely grant heavy. Jobs depended upon whether or not they had grants. And so there's also a broad and varying degree to the extent that the colleges that hire, the colleges that hire you might require some good grant writing skills because it's a good job skill to have, and helps improve the chances that you'll be a valuable asset to a future team. So my viewpoint has been to just apply and apply as often as I can. And the more I apply, the more comfortable I'm getting at the process, because each one's a little different. And so my recommendation or suggestions, if it's worth anything, is don't let the question of should I apply stop you. Just go for it. Even if you don't get it, it's a great learning experience. So far, I've applied for 4, and the second one I did not receive. The other 2 I have, and the 4th one is to be determined. And you just learn every time you do it something valuable that contributes to the next one that you want to consider. And maybe it's a bigger one and something more consequential. To me, I don't think it really matters. I think they're all great practice.
Yeah, that's a great point, and thank you for that. It's part of our thought process with this is that we do want it to be practice. I mean, in all honesty, this is, from the evaluation standpoint, this is practice for all of us too. I mean, this is a graduate level run grant that has, the backing of the Office of Research and Innovation. But yeah, definitely apply if for no other reason than to practice applying. So I think that was, thank you for that. And it's immensely helpful for everybody involved.
Case with COVID, if you go on the market and you've got a grant, that's one thing to hopefully separate you when you go on the market.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Okay.
If you don't mind, so I think it would be good to kind of talk about when to apply. So because you can apply every semester, right? So if you that's my understanding, at least. If you don't receive it, you can reapply, right? Okay. Yes. So from my personal view, I suppose my perspective is that because the application window is actually like from when it opens to when it closes or when it's due is not a super long time. Totally doable, right? If you already have some sort of proposal prepared, but if you don't have like any idea what you're going to do for your project, I think maybe like that semester isn't really the best time to apply, just because like, so I already had a proposal prepared like for my dissertation committee. So then I could take that and rework it down to like however many words and put something together. And it was relatively easy to do in the time frame. But I think at least for my program, like if I had tried to come up with an entire project proposal in 3 or 4 weeks, at least for my own brain limitations, it would not be possible. So, but then also like, so yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is if you have some idea of what you're going to do, then it seems like it would be worth applying then, right? Rather than applying like your first or second semester in graduate school when maybe you don't have, and I mean, that's probably different for a master's student, but for a PhD student, at least from my perspective, maybe someone has a different idea about that. But I will say also that I think applying for practice is a great idea. But I do think that if the goal is kind of practice, and I know part of like the GPSC and the Research Council's goal is to help graduate students, I do think having maybe some feedback on the proposals would be really helpful. Because, if we're doing this for practice and we're trying to improve, it's hard to improve if you just like, if your feedback is just, you got it or you didn't, right? So that's kind of a pretty big or even for the people that get it, I would also like to know what I did well that is, so I can use that in future applications, like what I did well that I can make sure to keep doing for the future. So
Yeah. So on that, the first part, um, so Laura actually hosts a talk at the beginning of the last couple of semesters about research funding, and in the last couple of times, I have participated in that with Tiffany Marcantonio, and something that we talk about is that before you do obsess over having grant funding, you have to have an idea to pitch, right? Like if it's your first semester, you probably don't have an idea to pitch, or at least an idea that you can really articulate. And if you look at both the STEM rubric and now the humanities rubric, part of what we're asking you to do is explain to us how your research fits into the broader research. And if you're in your first semester, you probably can't do that. So we do anticipate that you have an idea. Um, most of what we get are for either a thesis or for a dissertation project. It doesn't mean that you have to be researching for that specifically, but I think it is generally assumed that if you're researching anything in grad school, you're doing it towards the end of that project. You don't have a lot of side projects going. On the issue of feedback, this is something that we've talked about a lot internally, and I don't actually have an answer on that other than we've talked about it. Part of our hesitation with feedback is that we don't want it to become combative, and it might ultimately become combative with any individual. But it's not totally off the table. There's concern about giving it. There's concern about not giving it. We don't have an answer for that. But yeah, I agree. When I apply for things outside and basically just get told no, I would like, it would be helpful to know why I got told no, sure, but we don't have a resolution on that. But that is something we've talked about. Yeah.
I was just thinking about how, so like for the NSF, if you apply to grants through the NSF, STEM or humanities grants, so like for the graduate research fellowship program, at least for example, they give you like basically the rubric that they use. They return that to you. And I understand what you're saying, because yeah, of course someone is going to be unhappy, right, with the way things played out. But I will say, well, maybe because the NSF is like a whole institution, but like there's not really any arguing with that, right? Like if you don't get the money, you don't get it. And there's like, what are you going to say? How dare you not give me the money? But it is what it is.
Yeah. It's definitely a fair point and a fair question, and it's something we have to eventually figure out. I will say on the topic of that, because it has to be brought up at some point, topic of field specific jargon, and a lot of times, not a lot of times, but sometimes when these grants really don't make it to round two, it's because we simply can't make heads or tails of what you're saying, because you have written it for somebody, you've written it for your advisor, and nobody knows. And we are out of the 12 of us, it's something like a 9-3 split between STEM and humanities. We're very STEM heavy, and we get more STEM applications than we do humanities applications. But when you run it past 9 STEM people and none of them can seem to land on the specific field that can understand what it is you're trying to say, there's not a lot we can do with that. And the directions are pretty explicit not to use jargon, or to do it in a very limited capacity. Or if you have to use it, do some kind of parenthetical definition as to what you're trying to as to what that word kind of broadly means. Because we are from all over campus. But that is one of the big problems that we have with grants. And some people's feedback would simply say that we could not understand what you were saying because you didn't follow the directions, and you wrote it as if you were writing it for your advisor. So definitely don't do that. If there's terminology that you just can't get around, and that's all, there's always something, you got to give us some kind of footnote or parenthetical definition of something so that we can kind of understand. We don't have to understand it on a very intimate level, but just kind of broadly speaking, what it is that what is it you're saying? So other things that people have. Oh, so Leslie had a question. Leslie, the amount that we award each semester is based on the funding that we have available. Right now, I can tell you that we for sure have the funding for 7 this semester. GPSC has saved an enormous amount of money because of COVID and all of our events being canceled and a lot of the travel grant budget not being used. So I have to ask GPSC for more money, and that has to be voted on. But I'm going to say that this semester we will probably do 12-ish, maybe more. We're going to wait to see how many applicants we get, and then ask for more money based on that. Preferably, we award about 25% of the people who applied. That's kind of our goal, but it's fluid. But right now we're for sure doing 7. That's what we have the money for right now.
Also, I would just like to note that we're awarding these awards based on like the proportion of humanities and STEM-based applications that we receive. So in that way, we make sure that we always award a certain number of humanities based applications, if that makes sense.
Right. It's awarded proportionally. So if 30% of our
Right.
applicants are in the humanities, then 30% of our grants go to the humanities, in order to sort of create some fairness. Our applications are STEM heavy, but STEM also has most of the money compared to humanities, to be honest. So we try to make sure that we're not locking the humanities out. So it's proportional. And before
Actually,
sorry, what?
sorry, good. No, I was going to read what Ashley said in the chat.
Well, I was,
Wait, go ahead.
I want to I know Laura has an announcement she wanted to make, and I keep forgetting about Laura. It's about funding as well. So if Laura wants to do that.
Yeah, I posted in the chat, but basically I learned this morning that we found a little bit of extra money in a fund that we didn't know about. And so we have turned that to research. So we find sometimes there's a specific program, like a computer program you need to run your data, or a tool in that way that you can't find money to help you pay for. And so we have instituted a new grant. It's called the Fellowship Fund. I've asked them to add research or to change the title to research. We'll see, so that it's more obvious, because it's not just for fellows and it's not just for PhD, it's for any degree seeking student. The goal would be that you are trying to finish your research to graduate and you need a tool, a tech piece, or whatever to do it. And so applications are open. There's a March 1st deadline for the summer. That'll be the first time we award it. That may very well be the only time if we get an influx of awards or offers, because it is a limited funding source. But while we have it, we're giving it out in this way. And so like I said, since I just found out about it, I thought this was a perfect place to let y'all know that we had it, so you could help spread the word. Thanks, Will.
Thank you. We always like news about more free money. So thank you for that. So Ashley had a comment somewhere up here. Other problems that we see in other members of the Research Council who are here may have things to add. The first thing that popped into my mind, problems that we see when trying to assess these grants. It's happened in a very limited way, but it was kind of jarring when it did happen. I thought it was jarring anyway. There was an entire grant written that didn't have a single citation. It had no references. It had nothing. And that doesn't work. That doesn't work. If you're talking about your field, your research, where it fits in, what its agreeing with or contesting or whatever that you're doing with the field at large. I mean, cite something. Show us what you're engaging with. Books, articles, studies, whatever. So that's happened in a very limited capacity. But when it does happen, it's basically an automatic throw out, because we just can't, like Ragita mentioned towards the beginning. I mean, professionalism is key here, and I can't imagine submitting to anybody without some sort of reference or citation, or to help explain what it is that I'm doing. So make sure that you're demonstrating that you know what the literature in your field looks like, the studies look like, and how you're engaging with it in whatever way that you're doing it, and provide some examples. Are we going to go look those things up? No, but it's kind of a faith-based honor system thing here, where you're providing us with references and citations that just show that you're engaging.
I guess another thing that I've kind of noticed too is, especially for the STEM-based applications, in kind of like the section where you talk about your procedures and methodologies, sometimes I understand that you may not know like the exact procedure yet when you're writing the applications, but it would help if you could just kind of be a little bit more specific with the procedure. Sometimes I just kind of see just like a term listed and that was it. And I kind of don't understand, like, we shouldn't have to like look so hard to understand, look to other sources to understand what's like going on in your research. Just kind of wanted a little bit more specificity, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Can I offer a suggestion to that point?
Yes, please.
Sure.
So something that's helped me, and I guess that the panel thought was good because they awarded me this grant, was to think about my whole project as though I was going to explain it to a 5-year-old. So I would lay out all of the steps, make them really, really simple. And then if anything didn't make sense, I would then add on that, provide more details, expand. That gives you like a really, really strong and concise framework for your project. And then you can go back and add those things that a 5-year-old wouldn't understand, like some of the more technical terms or the citations and pulling in the previous literature and stuff like that. That's been really helpful for me explaining some of my research. And I think will probably help when people are reading your grant application, help deal with some of those discipline, cross-subject complications, because you've explained it in a way that's really easy for anybody to understand.
You had me at explain it like you're talking to a 5-year-old. That's a very important point, because that's kind of what we need on a lot of these, where it's comprehensible. And I have no problem if you want to explain to me your cancer research as if I'm 5, because quite frankly, when it comes to cancer research, I probably know about as much as a 5-year-old. So yeah, be basic, take away the complexity and just make it intelligible to a broad audience. Joshua had a question up here. How do people decide which type of grant category, STEM or humanities, they will be evaluated as? That is actually up to the applicant. On the form itself, it asks you to classify yourself broadly, either STEM or humanities. So when you apply, you're going to tell us how we are evaluating you. We tried last semester with a 3rd category, which was that of hybrid. We're ditching hybrid for this round. The problem with hybrid that we found was that we would have people from the exact same department apply, and one person would choose STEM, the other person would choose hybrid. And it kind of creates a disconnect there. So if you apply, in a very broad context, say I'm either in STEM or I'm in humanities, and I know that can get kind of wonky. Like I know Ashley does like biological anthropology, right? They can be kind of wonky. I get that. but which one do you feel you're really, you're really more established in, and go with that. Law school, humanities. I think everybody from the business school last semester chose humanities, even though some of those got extremely mathy. Just you classify yourself essentially. Yeah.
I also just wanted to mention, I think this is a good practice for any grant application, but I think it helped me in this particular case to include verbiage from the rubric, because if, reviewers are, the rubric is there for a reason. So they're looking for specific information that's associated with the different categories that they're reviewing on. So trying to include like verbiage and words from the rubric for those particular categories to point out where exactly you're putting information that they're looking for, because of course, like if they're going down the rubric and saying like, oh, did she include this? Well, if the words are right there that shows that you included that, right, it's hard to say like, oh, I missed it, so that always helps me with writing grant applications as well.
I think another thing that was helpful, so in my prior job, I was kind of a one of few, and so there were not a team of other people to turn to for questions and resources. And I learned quickly to Google it, to just go and ask, what are some examples of grant proposals? What do they look like? What is their purpose? What is their intent? What are some templates? That was for my very first one, that was my first step, to educate myself on not only my view, but what the reviewers could be looking for, and then to just get some ideas of what they include. And then second to that, for writing, just the first round, just write it all out, everything you can think of, and then get very comfortable cutting out a lot, because it's very easy to overdo it, in my opinion, and it's really hard to figure out how to just get to the point. And by figuring out what else is out there and then learning to just write it out the first time and cutting it, that helps to really figure out what message you're trying to send and how to communicate it well, without cluttering it with meaningless additional statements that do more to confuse than to really orient where the message is going or where the grant is going specifically.
So
Yeah, sorry, did somebody have?
yeah, that was just going to say that I agree with what both Ashley and Alicia were saying. I know that when I wrote mine, I actually took the template and wrote it with the template. So I just did each section. I used that as my document to kind of make sure I was keeping in line with what they wanted. And then kind of going back to what Christina had said and Alicia about like readability. I know after I was finished with it, I gave it to like my partner to read, who's completely not in my field at all, to like say, like, can you read this? Can this make sense to you? Like, do you understand what I'm saying that I'm doing here? Because he's not in like a research focused field. So that I think was helpful.
I think that's actually goes to a question I wanted to ask about. I mean, did you all have, before you apply, did you have other people, read to see if they understood what you were talking about, or even just read it for grammar? Did anybody engage with that?
Absolutely. I went to my mentor, and every time I write a grant, I go to him and say, okay, I'm doing this. Now that I've done 2, 3, I'd like to tackle it on my own the first time and then get your input. The first one, it was very collaborative. I wasn't sure what to write for the first part or the last part. And for this one specifically, I wrote the first one, and he was having someone who's written grants before is also beneficial, which he has done. And he was able to say, that part is where you're supposed to make the statement of impact, and it doesn't do a very good job. Try again. So it wasn't like he said, you need to say this instead. He pointed out where it was a little off key, and that helped me at least recognize where it was off and had to figure out for myself how to make it better. And so that to me is also important, not just having someone rewrite it for you, but just point out where it could be improved. If they're rewriting it for you, then it's really hard the second grant or the third grant to figure out how to do it yourself.
We have a string of questions, I think. Jamie Walker. Jamie, no. So if you applied in the fall and didn't get it, we don't keep a running list of people who have been rejected and penalize you or whatever. There's nothing like that. If you apply again, it's blank slate, same as it was last time, and there's no penalty. You're good to go on that one. So Josh had a couple of questions. Is there a way to access prior winners' proposals? The short answer to that is no, for a couple of reasons. One, we haven't decided as to whether or not that would be anything anybody would agree to. That would be something that we would ask specifically for a signed release for, because people, rightfully so, are very protective of their research. They should be. There's a privacy issue there. So if we may put together some kind of form where people could say and sign, yes, you can put my winning proposal on the website as an example, but we haven't come to any conclusions on that. And I would kind of be surprised if too many people were willing to do it, but we can kick that around. Do you need advisor approval to apply? Part of the application process is having your advisor sign a form that basically attests to your ability. We have no way to know if you're actually, able to do this. We have no way to really know if you know what you're talking about with your research or your field in general. So our assumption is that if your advisor will sign off saying that in fact you do know what you're talking about, that's good enough for us. We can't evaluate that really, but your advisor should be able to. So there is a faculty form. We're not even asking for a specific letter because the window because the application window is a little less than a month. We're not putting any sort of like letter writing on anybody. It's simply a form we've already created. You take it to your advisor and your advisor signs it. And that's about it. Ragita mentioned that. I thought I saw something else up here, but maybe not. I guess not. So yeah, on that, there's an advisor form. A question came up in the talk that Laura hosted at the beginning of the semester that Tiffany and I did about grant writing and just generally, grammar, particularly people that have English as a second language. So for one, on our grant, we do our absolute best to take into account if the person writing is clearly writing from the perspective of English as a second language, because there's going to be, a difference there, especially depending on how long they've studied English and how long they've been in the country and around it and all of that. So we try to take that into account. What we do is encourage everybody that writes one of these, whether English is your first language or your fifth, to use graduate resources at the Writing Center, if nothing else, just to have them look at it for just general mistakes. None of us are English teachers. I don't think we have anybody in English on Research Council actually, but just take advantage of the free resources on campus just to make sure that it does appear professional from a grammatical and spelling, punctuation, that kind of thing perspective. So a question that comes up on both applications, STEM and humanities, is try to explain to us how your research is applicable beyond the classroom or the lab. Do you all have any suggestions on how you make that explanation work? On how you're showing the practicality of what you're doing? From our former recipients.
I personally struggle with the theoretical side more than the practical side. I think it's helpful going back to at least having a project partially pursued and partially in the works where you've got a few studies run. In my line of work, it's common to have 5 or 6 studies. So if I had 1 or 2, that informs at least whether or not there's something worth pursuing. Then I can try to think, okay, my advisor's been pushing me. What's the theoretical contribution? What does prior theory say? What does current theory say? What's your contribution? And actually being able to write that out in one sentence is critical for me And then at the same point, when it comes to the practical side, it's really valuable for me to look at whoever could use this from the practical side. In my line, it's consumer financial decision making. So it's oftentimes banks or credit unions or financial institutions. If I was a manager there, what would they want to take away from my research? And asking these questions is, to me, the first step to be able to handling them. And then I put on my manager hat and try to say, why would I care? And when I can do that, then I feel like I've got a good handle and it's worth applying for a grant or worth applying for internal funding to pursue it further. If I can't answer those questions, it doesn't mean it's not. It might just mean it's worth a little more reading, lit review, or browsing a website of a credit union to see what they're doing right now and where I could put a contribution into. So going back to the front process of understanding your market and understanding your target, and that's helpful.
I think also kind of like what I did with having finished mine and had someone else read it is like, if you haven't already, talk to someone else about your research who's not in your field, like a friend or your family who aren't involved in that. So you can kind of get like their perspective on what you're doing, because oftentimes then they can also help you build those links on how you can connect it with other people and other things outside of your area of interest that might be helpful.
For me, the long-term, broader impacts is probably the hardest part, because what I was doing was largely exploratory. I had no idea really what was going to happen, and I had several different hypotheses. Something that helped me, though, answer that question was to ask myself, well, if I find what I think will happen, what's that going to mean? If I don't find it, what's that going to mean? Because sometimes non-significant results are just as important as significant ones. And then if something weird happens, why might that have happened? And that was helpful in, answering what long-term or what are the implications of this research? Just thinking about like all the different possible outcomes and what they might mean.
Okay. I think that's all solid advice. I feel like the idea of taking your research to somebody like a family member or a friend who's definitely not into what you're doing, and that can help you anticipate questions on why does this matter? I think we've probably all been asked at some point, why does that matter? That can help you anticipate, I think. So that is a good point. Does anybody, I'm trying to see, so we've got roughly 5 minutes if we need it. Anybody have anything they specifically wanted to add, any sort of sage advice to this to approaching this process?
I just wanted to add, for anybody who works with human subjects or has to deal with an IRB in some way, I found that writing the grant proposal was a lot like going through the IRB process. It felt like a lot of answering detailed questions that maybe I didn't think were important, but helped get through that. So if you are somebody who has to go through the IRB process, if you've done it before writing this grant, that's a good series of documents to help guide you through this process.
On the topic of the IRB, if you do require the IRB to clear your project, we expect that that's either happened or you're in the process of making that happen when you apply. That is something that has to be addressed in the application specifically, is whether or not you've done that or are in the process of doing that. So Ashley has, I think, maybe an interesting perspective. As the very first grant that we did, she was a member of the Research Council. And then the second grant, she was not, and she was a recipient. And, we changed the rubric quite a bit between those 2 points. So I don't think she had an advantage. I think it was just all pure, unfettered intellect. So Ashley, do you have anything to add from your experience?
Oh my God, wow, I feel so, thank you. I think, yeah, I'm not sure that sitting on the research council for that year or semester really, I don't know how much insight necessarily it gave me, but it did help me realize, which is true of any grant reviewing panel, that we're all just people, right? So I don't know. Sometimes I think I can get in my own head about applying to grants, like, but I think just remembering that the reviewers are people too, and thinking about like what makes you interested in a grant, and making it sound interesting. So sometimes that goes like the verbiage that you're using, like it goes with the verbs and like the tense in which you're writing. But really trying to put into your application that you're excited about what you're doing, right? So if you're just writing it and is very like, as someone's reading it, it sounds very monotonous, or it sounds like, like very, or especially if it's technical, that can be difficult. But I really tried to make an effort to put, like, remembering like that reviewers are people, trying to put that enthusiasm into the application. I also think that like having nice figures or photos, that adds to the like human component of the project as well. So if you have, maybe you do something very technical, but if you have a nice kind of simplistic photo or figure that can illustrate that. For me, like I use skulls to do my research, but I included like photos of the live animals that I study. I don't know, I thought that was a nice thing to include. I don't know how the reviewers felt about it, but I thought it made it a little more interesting. So that's about it.
Well, I think that's a good point. Passion, I don't know if you can hear it. My cat is screaming at the door, but having passion, I think at this point we're probably all teaching, and students engage with you better when you're excited about what you're talking about, even if it's something that's seemingly boring on its face. If you can show that you're excited, they become more excited and receptive. And that's a good point, is that we are all people. And if you can convey, why this is, exciting, or why it's so interesting. I could not tell you who applied, or what the application exactly was, but we had somebody doing a lot of stuff with bees. I don't think about bees very often, but it was one of the most exciting applications I had read, because they were just really into these bees. And, and it helps. I don't understand all the terminology or the purpose, but I wanted to know more because they just made it seem so interesting. So, if you can add that touch of passion, which is, it's kind of this hard thing to, to put a numerical value on, is a different thing to kind of, put into words, but somehow if you can kind of bottle that and throw it in there, that definitely helps. Anybody have anything else to add, or any questions before we check out? Ragita, do you have anything that you wanted to throw in there?
I mean, not really. I guess I just want to kind of thank everybody for being here and spending all this time to just kind of give potential applicants some advice. Heard some really good advice that, I mean, I would also be taking into account when I'm applying for future grants for myself. So yeah, thank you so much for everything. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all for your insights and experiences and all of that. Hopefully it will be helpful. We'll put this on the website as well, where it will remain time immemorial, and we will just hope that it's useful to anybody who watches. So thank you all for doing that and for giving us an hour of your time.
Thank you.